There are two kinds of military history obsessives in this world. There are those who realize that they have far more in common with Mark Corrigan than any sane person ever should, and there are those who do not. For the former, every day is a great Faultian struggle, to not mention the war. And for the latter, well...
By the winter of 42, the whole city was surrounded by the massed Sixth Army. The Russians couldn't hold on much longer.
Every part of life seems to be connected one way or another to the war, and if not that war, then to another one or some other. The obsession with one particular element of history can grow so strong that it even comes to infect the way in which we can learn about all the rest of it. And this problem is especially strong within popular military history, where this general urge to compare everything to something else, again, often World War II, is so strong that it borders on the parasitic. The longbow was a wonder weapon of its time, the machine gun of the Middle Ages. Whoa, literally any siege in history, it featured a stalemate defensive line? Well, that's basically World War I. Do you know that the column of attack was basically a Napoleonic blitzkrieg? The Second World War in particular, and especially the German side of things, I find, really suffers from this problem, as people will take literally any opportunity with pretty much any topic to relate it to the Wehrmacht or Stalingrad or something like that. And yet, these common comparisons, whatever they consist of, are so often, well, useless. In my last video about the accuracy of muskets, I touched on this concept of comparison in military history, and how easily this simple tool can become, for lack of better phrasing, silly, maybe even toxic. And so in this video, please, stop comparing everything to the Blitz. But before I harp on it too much, comparison as an educational tool isn't without its merits, both as we learn and teach history. All knowledge is built upon prior knowledge and experience and the like. It builds up within us over what is already there. There's no such thing as a purely independent education which does not rely on an externality of one sort or another. And this makes comparison as an educational tool both inevitable and indeed quite useful when in its proper context. History is inherently a science and an art which is dealing with a reality which we can never fully know, blocked as we are by that perfidious temporality. And military history is especially difficult in that regard. Reading books, doing military reenactment, and even real-life military service are all things that can provide us with little windows, little insights into that world, but ultimately, they'll never be perfect one-to-one representations of it. The past is something ultimately lost to us and physically unreachable. The only way for us to access it is through these myriad little windows which we collectively call history. And history is not a fixed point, but all of it is interpretation. It is simultaneously an art and a science, a craft, which is constantly changing as both new evidence is brought to light and new methodologies come about to interpret that evidence. And now, sometimes you might agree with those methodologies, sometimes maybe not. That's the whole point. History is not a theocratic absolute. But my point with all of this is that this idea, this tool, this tiny window of comparison, is one of many which we have available to us to help better understand history. If someone is genuinely, just really knowledgeable, about World War II and about, Second World War military stratagems and all that, but then, maybe they don't know anything at all about the Napoleonic era, well then, obviously, making certain limited comparisons between the two, it can be very helpful to helping them understand. The French column of attack to blitzkrieg, the use of fortified outposts to the basic idea behind a defense in depth or something maybe. When you boil down these very complicated ideas down to their absolute most basic core principles, well, then they might become a basis upon which to build up a greater and more complete form of understanding. Comparison can be and regularly is a very useful tool in education. But the trouble is that it can also be dangerous. It's a double-edged sword which can and often does go too far, becoming a crutch on which we as educators and students can lean in lieu of a more thorough and legitimate education. And even worse is that in the hands of certain sensationalized pop history outlets that are more concerned with the bottom line, the view count and everything, or even potentially spinning a narrative, than they are with proper historiography, well, as I used the word before, this dynamic can very easily become parasitic. But you know what isn't parasitic? Far from it, in fact. Well, that's right, it's this video's sponsor.
This video has been sponsored by the Atlas Coffee Club.
Oh,
Hey, little Timmy, you feeling all right?
the battle waged for hours, Brandon. The French ambushed us in the hills. We never saw it coming.
Oh, well, that sounds tiring.
There is an immovable weariness in my bones, Brandon. I feel as though a great weight is pushing upon my very soul.
Well, yikes. It's kind of heavy stuff, Timmy. I don't really know how to transition this into a coffee ad.
Am I worth nothing to you beyond the means of making advertisements, Brandon? And am I nothing?
Aha! I've got it! You said you're tired, but hey, I've got just the pick-me-up for you. A subscription to Atlas Coffee Club.
Oh, here we go again.
Every month on schedule, you get your order of coffee coming from a different part of the world. They source all of their single origin, 100% Arabica coffee from over 50 different countries, so you're always going to be getting something from somewhere new, and they always pay above fair trade value rates for it. Then, alongside the actual, coffee, you get a little postcard, of course, from the country, from the region that it comes from, and you also get an information card, which has details about the flavoring, the roasting level, and then the actual, again, area where the coffee is coming from. Now, admittedly, I don't actually drink coffee. So then, why are, as you saw in the B-roll there, so many of the pods here missing? Did I just sort of sequester them away in the household to make it look like I've been drinking? Well, no. Everyone else in my life is normal, and they do drink coffee, and they've been enjoying it an awful lot. As a little testimonial for that, you can look here at the honest-to-God text conversation that I had with my mother after sending her some of it.
Well, all right, Timmy, what do you think of that?
Brandon, why am I even here?
Well, because I need to explain to someone all about how you can visit my link in the description below and use the code BRANDONF to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first month of coffee. And remember, you can feel free to pause, skip, or even cancel the subscription at any time. It's a great deal. Thank you to Atlas Coffee Club for sponsoring this video, and now let's return to it all.
It's very easy for comparison to go too far, leaving us with more questions than we have answers, and a dumbed down or oversimplified vision of the past, which will in turn damage our ability to learn more. Boiling down the basic principles of different military doctrines and comparing the core values behind them can be very useful, a valuable way to help individuals who are familiar with one side to understand the other. But all too often, that isn't the form that comparison takes. Instead, it's the over-the-top sensational stuff, like what I mentioned at the video's start. Comparing a medieval longbow to modern-day rifles, even machine guns? It's a ridiculous comparison, and a one that I've seen far too much of. And not only are the actual devices themselves so inherently far removed from one another, one being a single-user, single-shot weapon loosing an arrow, while the other is, I don't have to explain how a flipping Maxim works to make that point, but not only that, those material circumstances, but the context in which they were being used, the purpose they served,
are very different from one another. Depending on the gun in question, a service rifle can be the primary means of modern warfare, or different kinds of machine guns can be used as defensible emplacements, as area denial tools, all that kind of stuff. Whereas a bow of any sort is primarily a skirmishing device used by armies in an era when they're still focused on spears and swords and body armor and the like. Most of the traits that are going to be desirable in a longbow simply aren't applicable for a machine gun, and vice versa as well. Even trying to compare much more alike weapons from the same time period can fall prey to those same pitfalls. Comparing an SMLE to a Vickers machine gun, you can only go so far because the weapons are serving entirely different functions. An SMLE is, yes, much more accurate than a Vickers, so does that make it better? Well, no. The Vickers isn't intended for individual accuracy, it's serving a different purpose. Really, the only similarity between a longbow and a machine gun is that they're both ranged weapons, and they were both very impressive for the context in which they were used. But we don't go around saying that slings were the machine guns of their times. It's just because the people who are writing these sort of puffy, kinda nationalistic-y books about Agincourt, they want a pithy tagline to sound cool. The longbow was the AK-47. It doesn't make any sense, though. So, what about something on a bit of a larger scale? What if we compared, for example, the shock tactics and combined arms techniques of 18th century warfare to things like the German Blitzkrieg? Well, again, yes, there are certain similarities, but once you look past those most basic principles, it falls apart because, as with all things, the devil is in the details, and Blitzkrieg is something that very much was reliant upon its time and context as soon as you get past the basic principle. Yeah, both techniques, sure, featured piercing an enemy line with overwhelming force at a singular point in order to exploit a gap through which reserves might be sent, and then you turn the enemy's flanks and you could potentially surround them and whatnot. But then, overall, that basic principle of you hold an enemy in position with weaker elements before concentrating one's forces on a singular point, that's a fairly common concept throughout military history. It's been used in various different forms in all sorts of different environments. So, are all of those different examples of the shock principle going to be termed the Blitzkrieg of whatever century? Were the Karelians the Blitzkrieg of the early modern world because they went fast and shocked their opponents with it? Was the Battle of Gettysburg Lee's attempt at a blitz through the Union lines because he maintained a frontage, but then they had a big infantry charge down the center? It's starting to fall apart there. Were the French columns of attack during the Revolutionary Wars their version of a lightning war? Of course not. That's silly. The very nature of warfare across all those different settings was incredibly varied, to say nothing, of course, how Blitzkrieg relied on motorized transport. It's like, I don't think that we need to spend all too much time going into exactly why all of those different settings and whatnot were very different from one another. It's kind of obvious when you look at the tin. But the point is, it isn't comparing like with like. It's drawing false conclusions, potentially, about how all of these different tactics, how and why they were employed, when they were employed and all that, because beyond defeating the enemy, they were all aiming at very specific and very distinctive tactical aims. Things like the German Blitz seem particularly prone to this kind of rhetoric. We don't often hear how, these tanks were the cuirassiers of their day, but we do often hear it the other way around, even if it wouldn't seem like that makes all too much sense. Surely it would be better to compare what came later to what came before, right? To better demonstrate the evolution of technology and how doctrines changed over time? Well, no, because these comparisons always lie in what is more popular than what is more genuine or appropriate. Think about the most common comparisons that you see. It's always going to be to something like the Romans or the Spartans, to samurai and ninjas, the Wehrmacht or Marines, even to, of course, the Redcoats. It's very rarely done, though, for Central Africans or South Americans, Indians, just as a few examples there. It's the deadliest warrior approach to history, and it allows us to draw conclusions that are inappropriate, to say the least. In making these sorts of comparisons so lightly, not only are we arguing that these incredibly disparate systems are comparable to start with, but we're also implicitly saying that the object of reference is in some capacity the refinement or even the ultimate form of that which it is being compared to. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you compare everything and anything to the German Blitz, well, doesn't it start to look like the Blitz is the perfect doctrine? That ultimate form of military art to which all others must be compared to and rated against? When you compare every kind of soldier to the Waffen-SS, even if you say that the SS would lose, well, ultimately you're still saying that they are comparable, that they're on a similar playing field, that they were exactly what the propaganda says they are, and not the historical record. It can so easily reinforce the popular perceptions of history without regard to the reality, to proper historical understanding and research. And again, you can see this exact same thing with ancient Rome, with feudal Japan, and yes, even with British imperial history, this kind of thing is way too common. I'm really just using World War II and Nazi Germany here because, well, I feel like that's one of the most common examples, and even more importantly, it's one of the most obviously damaging examples. When we make comparisons like this, when everything becomes a blitzkrieg or a Wunderwaffe or the SS or whatever, all we're really doing is feeding the Wehraboo machine. Comparison can be a very useful tool. It can potentially help individuals to bridge gaps in their knowledge and form understandings which would otherwise be impossible. But it is a double-edged sword. It can go too far. Oftentimes, the moment you look into comparisons with any level of real depth, which ultimately is necessary for real education, they fall apart. But so many sources of popular history, from books to video games to films, and yes, even YouTube videos, will emphasize those broadest possible points, the comparisons, in the name of just getting people interested or introducing the ideas, without any care, without any consideration to the deeper implications of what it is they're saying. And that, in turn, not only promotes, but solidifies the stereotypes, the sensationalized, the flawed perspectives of history which are so common. And at times, I believe it can even lead to some very nasty conclusions in the minds of individuals who consume it. False ideals, for example, of what war is, of how and why it is waged, and of course, ultimately, when it is just and when it is not. If you've any interest in history at all, especially military history, then there is no doubt that you've run into these examples, and it's most likely that you've even used them yourself. I know for certain that I am guilty of this sin, including in a professional sense. I've made these sorts of comparisons in videos before, sometimes well, sometimes not very well. I only hope, as all public historians should at least, that the wider body of my work will, as a whole, advance the public understanding more so than it does commodify it. It's difficult. It's a balancing act, and it's not always easy. But I believe that the thing which makes military history so important, the core of this field, is its human element. It's all too common in our books, in our films, again, tabletop and video games, and I hate to say it, but especially
in reenactment, for that core to be neglected. Neglected in favor of an almost fetishistic obsession with the technicalities of warfare. The specs of the guns being fired over the hands that are carrying them. The weight of the packs rather than the backs which are bearing them. The over-the-top, inspired by real events, epic tales, rather than the real people who have real stories, they're being turned into a spectacle, basically. It's a very difficult balance to strike. Again, especially for people in career paths like myself, which is so inherently dependent on getting that popular audience, right? And it's especially dangerous because we almost have to, in the pursuit of those popular audiences, use such dangerous tools as comparison. It's a difficult balance to strike. I do my best. Sometimes I fail, but I hope on the whole, generally speaking, especially as my career proceeds, I hope that I do it well. And that is why I am very, very excited to announce what I hope will be a project to use this tool of comparison as it is intended and to great positive effect. I'm putting together an anthology-style book series titled Something Like Philosophy, which will seek to tell the stories of privation and suffering, trauma and horror throughout all of military history. By bringing together authors from many different walks of life, students and professional academics, reenactors, and of course modern-day military veterans, I hope that all of them, with their different writings and different articles that they submit to the anthology series, I hope it will help to I hope it'll help readers to draw connections, basically, help it to draw understandings about the nature of warfare itself, even throughout such disparate times and environments. Every invited author will write their own article on their own chosen topic across all of military history, so long as it's relating to those core themes which are, again, so regularly lacking in the popular awareness of military history, especially prior to the First World War. In future editions as well, I even plan to open up applications for some of you to contribute articles of your own if you'd be so interested. It would be a paid opportunity, no worries, but we'll come to all that in the future when the time comes. I am ultimately very, very excited about this opportunity, and I hope that my initial volume will perform well enough to justify making another, and that we can eventually turn this into a long-running series. For greater details, I'll be making a more formal announcement about the project soon enough, but in the meanwhile, if you're interested in helping me to make this all happen, the book is now available actually for pre-order at a discounted price. You'll find it linked in the description down below, and I'm hoping, it's a very rough estimate, but I'm hoping to release the book sometime in around April of next year. I hate doing pre-orders, but to put it bluntly, I want to be able to pay the contributing authors fairly for their work, but I just don't have that kind of money up front. Pre-ordering your copy of the book today will help me to actually guarantee payment for these people. And pre-orders are also limited in number. It's limited to the amount that I actually need to make the book a thing without spending undue amounts of money out of my own pocket. And as I said, it is, when it's for pre-order, it is for a discounted price. It's basically removing my margin from it. So please do check out that offer below if you would like to see this project become a reality. But that is enough shilling for now. Thank you all so very much for your time with me today. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I hope that it's made you think a little bit about the different tools that we can use in historical education. Think about their value and how they might be best applied. A special thanks, of course, to the patrons whom, by virtue of their support, make this video and all of my work possible. And until the next time, my dear and most... I had it all in one take and then I messed it up right at the end. Thank you, my dear viewer, and until the next time, I am and I shall remain, that's it, your most humble and obedient of servants.